From Bowling Green State University and the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society, this is BG Ideas.
I'm going to show you this with a wonderful experiment.
You're listening to the Big Ideas Podcast, a collaboration between the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society and the School of Media and Communication at Bowling Green State University. I'm Jolie Sheffer, Professor of English and American Culture Studies and the Director of ICS. As always, the opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of BGSU or its employees. Bowling Green State University and its campuses are situated in the Great Black Swamp and the Lower Great Lakes region. This land is the homeland of the Wyandot, Kickapoo, Miami, Potawatomi, Ottawa, and multiple other indigenous tribal nations present and past who were forcibly removed to and from the area. We recognize these historical and contemporary ties in our efforts towards decolonizing history, and we thank the indigenous individuals and communities who've been living and working on this land from time immemorial. This season of Big Ideas focuses on sustainability and sustainable practices. True sustainability is dependent on equally balanced responses to social, economic, and environmental needs. Today's episode addresses how the intersections between activism, performance, and storytelling foster social sustainability through equitable action and representation. I'm very pleased to be joined by Dustin Lance Black and Dr. Lesa Lockford. Thanks so much for being here. Dustin Lance Black is an Academy Award-winning screenwriter, director, and producer whose credits include the 2009 Oscar-winning film Milk and the 2017 ABC miniseries When We Rise. Black is a prolific activist for LGBTQ+ rights and a co-founder of the American Foundation for Equal Rights, AFER, which played an instrumental role in overturning California's Proposition 8, which bans same-sex marriage. Black's 2011 play, 8, chronicles those proceedings. In 2019, he published his memoir, Mama's Boy, A Story from Our Americas. Dr. Lesa Lockford is chair of the Department of Theater and Film at BGSU and a professor of acting, voice, performance studies, and qualitative inquiry. Her academic work includes her 2004 book, Performing Femininity, Rewriting Gender Identity, and articles in journals such as the International Review of Qualitative Inquiry and Cultural Studies Critical Methodologies. She also wrote and performed in a solo piece entitled Lost Lines, which is about her grandfather, a vaudeville performer in the 1920s. Thanks for joining me. Lance, you have a rich portfolio of both creative and activist work about LGBTQ+ history, representation, and social justice. Could you describe in your own words what you see as some of the through lines in your work and how you think about the relationship between the creative and the activist?
I guess I'm the through line. Trying as best I can to practice what I preach, I write what I know. So perhaps it's not surprising that as a gay person who grew up in the Mormon church in a conservative part of the South, I've worked on and written things like Big Love, Mormon, Under the Banner of Heaven, upcoming Mormon, and then a lot of queer, stories that frankly, I wish I had known those stories existed when I was struggling as a closeted queer child in San Antonio, Texas. So, I guess perhaps, and it's not what captures my attention anytime I'm about to set forth on a new project, but I think it's there, which is, would this story have been helpful for me? Does this help to correct the record? Does this help to build and chronicle a history that's been lost? The LGBTQ+ history that's either been covered up with shame or fear, absolutely erased, both intentionally through legislation, but also because of a plague. So, so much of my work is about rebuilding a history that's been lost and making sure that young people out there, young queer kids coming up in places where they might not have role models, they might not feel safe, they know that they did have foremothers and forefathers who fought for them, and that they have reasons for hope and pride. I think that's a big part of it. But then the rest of it is also, I think, because I grew up with a mother who was, I think, abused by the Mormon church, who was paralyzed at a very young age, and I saw how she was treated unfairly because of her difference. I think she was aware of that, and it gave her a strong sense of justice, what justice meant, and she passed that on to me. So when I see things happening in the world that to me feel unjust, particularly to people who have been marginalized, who the system does not work for, minorities, it really pisses me off. I get angry. And anger is a part of passion, and that means if I adopt a project that might try to illuminate that issue and that problem, I'm going to love it enough. I'm going to stick with it for a very long time, and that's what you got to do in my business. So the through line is me. The through line is my narrative. So love it or hate it, that's what you get when you come to a Dustin Lance Black project.
Thank you. Lesa, you're an administrator, an educator, a researcher, and a performer, and your creative and academic work often deals with qualitative inquiry. How do you think about subjectivity and storytelling in your different professional roles? Is there kind of a connection among those?
Well, first of all, thank you for including me in this talk. I really do appreciate it. And hopefully there are some interesting connections between how I situate myself and Lance Black does. I would say, some of those roles fit more comfortably than others. And like everything, I think it is start with where you are, right? And so there's always got to be a point of view. And so whether it's as an administrator or whether it is as a performer, the writing from where you are, speaking from where you are, understanding that there is a dialogue that's going on to the other folks who are around you and how they impact that point of view is really, really key. I had a mentor who, I think one of the things that he told me early on that has always stuck with me is one of the most important questions you have to ask yourself is, where am I putting my body right now? What am I showing up for? So the idea of qualitative inquiry, or what I do, is always asking that question: where am I putting myself right now in regards to whatever it is I'm encountering, and what am I showing up for, and how am I showing up for it? So I suppose that's the real kernel of what it is that I'm trying to do in any of those roles or within my work.
Both of you infuse your respective creative works with many autobiographical or familial elements. What considerations do each of you make when adapting your own lived experiences, which are often deeply personal, even private, for public audiences?
Sorry, I'm going to ask you to repeat that. 'Cause
Sure.
I'm tired, but I'm also really stuck on what you just said. That is so wise, and I've never thought about it. Where are you putting your body?
Yeah.
It's so simple and clear. I'm stealing that from you. I'll credit you when I can.
It's from my mentor,
Okay.
so you can steal away. I think he'd be honored.
Well, how, because sometimes we sort of move through, particularly in the fields we're in, and it's murky. We're figuring it out. I mean, we are, I hope, inching our way through the dark to something, and we don't know quite what we'll find all the time. So where are you putting your body in those challenges? How smart is that?
Well, and maybe a different way of framing my question, sort of in relationship to that, is how do you think about the relationship between your body and the other people in your life who you might also be trying to represent? And how do you individually negotiate kind of what you share that is your story, but that also is someone else's story? And, you've written a memoir very recently, and you had to make decisions about what do you share about your mother's life and also your own personal life. How much do you share? What don't you? So how did you make some of those decisions?
I mean, I think if you're going to make something that is exciting and that is truthful, for me personally, I had to make a decision early on that I am going to share everything. And that is frightening. But at first it's frightening. It's also liberating in a way where now I don't really care what the newspapers or tabloids think they've found out, because I'm putting it all out there anyway. Writing a memoir, that memoir in particular, which is focused on my mother and our relationship, I don't think I would have been comfortable writing it when she was still around, because I did not want to pull punches. I wanted to share what happened from my perspective. And so, I think that if she read it, and I was very close with my mother, very loyal to my mother, but I think she would probably be upset at a few things that I shared. But that, those are the things that she sometimes felt shame around and wanted to keep private. But, I thought were actually quite meaningful and moving. And I thought she wasn't alone in some of those struggles. And though she might have had embarrassment or worry or shame around some things, I don't think she needed to. I don't think that she had to in any way. And in a way, it's wonderful to move forward in that kind of liberated show all fashion. I mean, we're not showing everything because some things aren't meaningful. But those things that are shared experiences where I think some are still experiencing great shame because they feel like they're alone. I do really enjoy telling stories that say, no, you're not. No. There are a lot of people who are experiencing those same things. And let's rip it open and let's figure out, why did we as a society decide to shame that? And is that appropriate? Is it actually hurting anyone? What is your litmus test for what deserves shame? And I think very few things do. I really embrace the individual. I really embrace self-expression. I really embrace making horrible mistakes as long as you know what to do on the other side of them. And so I really like to share those things. I think by being brutally honest, you actually help people understand how common our experiences are. If I'm brutally honest about the queer experience, I think straight people will relate to it better. Right? If I'm portraying gay relationships for all the good, the bad, the ugly, instead of, saying, no, we're perfect and we're wonderful, you have to love us. No, I want to show all of the, problems we have.
The messy humanity.
The mistakes we make. Because I think then my straight, cousins in Texarkana, Texas are going to be like, oh boy, I did that too. I stepped in that pile. You know what I mean? And so the answer is, as much as humanly possible, bear all.
What about for you, Lesa? How do you think about that balance between the private and the shared and disclosure and those sorts of questions?
I wrestle with it all the time. And one of the things that I do is I do try to put that other person in the audience for whatever I am doing, right? And you point out that your mom might feel awkward at some of those things. And I think there's also something that I say to myself, and that is sometimes they are not going to be happy what they see. And so I have to ask myself two questions. First of all, I have to say, don't I have part of this story too? Isn't this story also mine? I was there. I am a witness. I have the awareness of what's going on. And I also have to say, what purpose is this narrative serving? Who is being served by this now? So it's not just, but I also want to honor that person, right? And I think, what context you put it in is going to shift how that other person understands what you're doing too. So that can be a very, whether you're on the stage or whether it's, in print and those kinds of things. I did have sometimes when my family would sort of walk around going, oh my God, what is she putting in now? What is she going to say about us? And so, you have to work over time to sort of build the kind of trust you can with them that you're not going to, and there were things that I did have to make a decision and say, I can't put that in, right? So I have to come to, what is the truth of it for me as well as for that person. And there is a kind of dialogue, a sort of in my head dialogue with the other person to sort of, come to terms with that. There have been occasions where I've had to change things I didn't want to change, but I felt I had to defer to that person. And then there are other times when I chose not to and put them out there. And, when that happens, you have another opportunity for a dialogue with that person, hopefully, and sometimes it's in print back to you, for example, but it's still a matter of, I come back to that question, what is the purpose of this serving?
I think, and then when you take those sorts of stories into film and TV, where we don't have, 400 pages, 600 pages, however long a book needs to be, there's a lot of fictionalization that happens. There's a lot of compressing of characters, combining characters, telescoping timeline. There's going to have to be fictionalization done because it has to fit into an hour and a half to 2 hours. And that's not how these events, for the most part, took a lot longer than that. Lives last a lot longer than that. And so I relate to that sort of sharing early drafts. I do like to put it all out there. But sharing early drafts with the remaining real people saying, I have assigned to you as a character something someone else did. And I do ask, does that still feel truthful? Or if that feels dishonest, I'll assign it to someone else. So I do that dance a little bit, and it can get quite tricky in film and television because you are having to do a lot of combining and telescoping. For me, the intention is still to be very truthful. But if anyone ever asked, is that biopic accurate? I go, none are. And there's a lot of navigating to do on stories that are more recent stories because there are people who are alive, who are moving forward with their lives. And if you're going to start to assign to them things they didn't say or do, I do ask their permission.
So to me, that comes back to, and this is a metaphor that comes out of commerce and things like that, but I think there is a kind of distinction in terms of what contract you're forging with your audience, right? And so I think we looked at your trailer today, you and I, Lance, and, it said inspired by, right? And I think that is a kind of framing device that suggests everything here is not true, right? Is not actually happened, as if we could go back and really know what that was anyway, right? So that framing, I think, is really essential in part because the contract that you're forging with your audience is saying this is true. And, for example, I did an ethnographic performance some years ago that was based on interviews with people. And I embodied their voices and their words. I heavily edited what they said. Obviously I'm not those people, but it was an exercise at sort of somatically understanding who they were in the world, both through the rhythms of their voices as well as who they are. And then I did have one character. I had interviewed a lot more people than I could put in there. And the one person who had the sort of kernel story of that narrative, there was a lot of reasons why I didn't also want to stage her entirely, that I won't go into now. So I did composite of a variety of folks that I interviewed and created that character. And there were people in the audience who just loved this character. Mm-hmm. And I had a really interesting conversation with a friend of mine who's from Louisiana, and the character was from Louisiana. And she just fell in love with this character. And then when she found out that she was not real, her response was disappointment, absolute sort of, but I want her to be real, And so I learned, from that moment that I had forged the wrong contract with my audience in some regards in that. But I also felt that there is, we'll talk about this, I suppose, but, the question of truth is really significant here. And I think she was true. There was so much about her that was true. And we can pick that apart.
Well, and I think part of that is a great compliment, right? And great art really does sort of give that feeling of truth. The person was believable that you created because it was grounded in real people. It was many people as opposed to one. And this gets sort of to a bit of the question I have for you, Lance, which is a lot of your work does dramatize true accounts of notable, often under-recognized LGBTQ plus activists and figures. How are you approaching interpreting history to ensure that those stories are told both meaningfully and ethically?
I do think that artists should be allowed to bend and play with history if they'd like. It is soft clay anyway, history, and there are some who are going to really bend it to the point that I think sometimes it snaps. And those films can be incredibly entertaining. I mean, Oliver Stone has built a career out of doing this. He'll bend it, and he doesn't seem to mind if he's snapped it, as long as it's illuminating an idea he's had, and I think he feels it's entertaining. My issue with that is that part of my intention when I'm telling these stories is that I also, frankly, want them to be able to be used in some way to illuminate history, to be used perhaps in an academic environment, for people to be able to watch a popularized piece of history, and that's a springboard to reading more accounts that are far more detailed, that probably are even more truthful and accurate. So what I think an artist's opinion about how far they can bend history before it snaps is how we come to define their style. It's who they are. So I try not to bend it very much. And that sometimes makes it very, very difficult because I'd like to, because I get into the second act and I need something to happen because I'm getting bored, but nothing happened. And so I have to figure that out. I have to engineer that. I have to bring something new in. I have to talk to more real life folks and figure out what I can engineer there. But that's because I have an ulterior motive. I'll admit it. I'm not just here to entertain. I'm here to sort of fill in a history that has a lot of holes in it.
A question I have that I think relates to this conversation, because Lesa, you were talking about the kind of contract you have with your audience, and that clearly speaks to like what are the ground rules that your audience can expect, right? But you also, both of you in very different ways, are doing a lot of research to shape those narratives and to create them. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit, maybe Lesa, you can start us off. Like, what is some of the process that you engage with in your research and then turning that into a performance, a creative work. How do you approach that gathering of sources as a springboard for your own interpretation?
It's a messy business. It's a messy business. I wish it was, I could say it was straightforward. It's not. For example, with the show that was about my grandfather, who passed away when my mother was 9, I never knew him, but I had addresses, right? I had an address in the suburbs of Paris. I speak very little French, but I speak a little French. They didn't have taxis that dropped me off. I got to the place and I had to find my way to the town center. I had to find the address. I looked around. I asked people. I went into a library because that's what Americans do, right? If you want help, go ask a librarian. And of course, they're not like our libraries there, where anybody gets helped. It's like you're not a citizen, so I'm not sure I want to help you. But there was a woman who was the director of the library, and she, I told her what was going on, and she kind of leaned back and pulled a big book off the shelf, and it was a book where the addresses pre-World War II were matched with their post-World War II addresses. And she just said, "Oh, you have to go up here, turn right, and it's about 3 blocks up." And, so the lesson is, when in doubt, ask a librarian.
Always good advice.
But my point being is that, you launch yourself into certain things. Am I going to pick this up and this up? And it is scrappy, to use Barbara Herrnstein Smith's notion, right? It's a kind of scrappy thing where you're tussling with this and tussling with that. So it's not particularly straightforward. But yeah.
And what about for you? I mean, like Lance, you did a lot of research for Milk. You did a lot of talking to the living activists and site visits. How do you think about what constitutes research for you, and then how you then transform that into narrative?
I mean, my process, I guess, is about I am very research intensive. I spent a long time doing it, and I think part of the process for me is just stripping away other people's ideas and opinions. Get rid of them. So if you read a book and the author is no longer around, read about the author, because you'll learn what filter that story went through. If the author is still around, talk to the author, and you'll figure out, well, where did their opinions come into their depiction of these real life events and people. You start to get a sense of that, but nothing beats a firsthand interview. So whether When We Rise, J. Edgar, Under the Banner of Heaven coming out, and Milk, like you said, the hard work was to find the real people, win their trust, which takes some time. A lot of these things that I'm asking are, these are difficult stories. A lot of it is LGBT and of a certain generation. They do not want to talk about it yet. So then winning that trust. And then memory is a very squishy thing. It is inaccurate. I mean, you want me to give away my tricks? I'll give away my tricks. My favorite trick is after I've interviewed someone for some time and gotten their version of the story, and I'm straightforward about this. I let them know, listen, I'm going to do this thing on the other side of this, but first I want to hear it from you. And the thing is, I'm going to put you together with someone else who was in the room, maybe 3 people. And so that already gets them in their individual interview thinking, okay, I know I tell that version of the story in my speeches, but it's not quite true. So I'm going to tell you the real one because I know,
someone will correct them.
Person B is coming in the room. And then I have found that for the most part, getting those people together who often haven't been together for, half a century sometimes, they start to really correct each other's memory. And you get past the sort of, what I've found happens is people start to adopt a version of history that they read about themselves in a book or an article or on a documentary, and that wasn't accurate. And because, nothing really is. But together in a room, they start to correct the record. And you start to get to something. I think you get to something that's far more dramatic for me personally because it feels more real. Because it feels like very real people having to, not superhero versions of them that might appear in some newspaper or documentary, but very real, flawed, fallible people trying to deal with incredible challenges. And you only get to that sense of authenticity if you do the hard work to get the firsthand story, to take away any other author's opinion that they came to the page with, and to help the people who experienced it really remember what actually happened. It's a lot of work. but it's really fruitful, and you can feel it when you're reading something or watching something where the author has done that work.
I would just say that, yes. I think even just telling them ahead of time, you're going to do this thing, is going to, it alters completely how they're going to tell that story. And so that they're already thinking about that audience of the other persons in the room and what they will say. And there's also that kind of strange affiliation that happens between interviewer and subject, for lack of a better word, participant, in which how much are they trying to change the story in their own ways because they have reasons for it too, and then, as you say, because memory is, it's a false goddess. Where is the accuracy? We'll never really know what really happened, in some sort of objective sense. It's always from the points of view of everybody there. When I was doing one of the ethnographic performances I did, it was always a question of whether or not those people, for their own particular reasons, were trying to, change the record that was going to be represented through me, which was okay in my work, because if they want to represent themselves that way, I'm all for it in some sense, But I think there's a different matter when you're doing the work you do, which is about an actual history that's broader than the individuals that were present, right? We're talking about a cultural history.
A question I have for each of you is thinking about the medium or genre in which you're working. So, Lance, you've written for stage, screen, and page, right? Memoir now. What goes into your thinking about the relationship between the subject matter and the medium for it? So maybe like thinking about like 8 as a play as opposed to a film or a book or something else. And you could do that with any of your projects.
First of all, I'm sitting here going, oh my gosh, I've done all that stuff. How did I get this old? How did this happen? How did I do all that? It's really, that's where the activism and the arts sort of start to work together in a way to come to a conclusion of where will this story be most effective? Where do I put it? So the play is a really good example. The play, there was a need to get that story out immediately. We had a small window. Just for a little background on the play, the reason I did it was because we had a court case, which is rare on the way to the Supreme Court in a federal court in California. They had an actual trial where we called witnesses and stories were told, and our plaintiff stories were told, and people who had survived conversion therapy were there. The experts came and told more stories. It was incredibly moving. I think it was absolutely convincing that marriage equality should be the law of the land, but the opposition to it understood the power of what we were doing and worked very hard. In fact, took their argument all the way to the Supreme Court that cameras should be banned. So they wanted to shut down the stories. Well, if a television show or a movie takes years, we didn't have that. We had maybe, within that year, we would be going from that Ninth Circuit court to the Supreme Court. And we needed to get those stories out. So what could we do that was fast? A play. If I could write it quickly, which isn't always my strong suit, if I could write it quickly, we could actually get it up onto stages. And if I wrote a version of it that didn't need a lot of production, that could be done in a way that was somehow compelling enough as a reading, in fact, so we didn't even have to have rehearsals, boy, there we go. So really, that was sort of activism colliding with art that determined this needs to be on the stage. And thankfully it worked. We ended up in all 50 states with that play, with some amazing cast and on a version online that probably helped a lot. And I hope it had an effect on moving the numbers and getting sort of the public opinion on the favor of marriage equality, because they got to hear the stories of what people said under oath.
That's a project, too, that had a certain pedagogical element in that you did make this available in a way to bring to college campuses. Could you talk a little bit about how you thought about, in that case, sort of art as a pedagogical tool to help tell those stories?
Well, it is absolutely built to be a teaching tool. It was built to be a tool to bring community together, to talk about it. It was built in a way and designed so that on the other side of it, there was a talk back. So we always made sure that an expert from on the field would come and do a Q&A with the audience. It was built as a gathering tool and a teaching lesson, community sort of event hopefully could be built around it. I didn't want to have any of the encumbrance of having to have sets or rehearsals or any of that. And the last encumbrance would be, how much does it cost for them to stage it? Well, if you make it zero, it really helps. Like if anyone's looking to have their play go to 8 countries and 50 states, make it for free. But that was a big part of what I think led to it being more than just entertainment and being something that was developed to cause a little bit of good chaos in the community, to shake things up, to get people thinking, to get academics to come to. It was sort of a springboard to a wider conversation that each community in each state could have, because each state had different laws at the time, so that it was designed as an activist tool, and hopefully there's a little bit of art around the edges still.
And Lesa, speaking of the pedagogy, how do you in your pedagogy sort of think about educating students in those ethics of performance, in kind of using art as a tool for telling a kind of truth, whether that's a capital T truth or a small t truth? For you, what is that relationship like?
Well, I think you do an awful lot of listening. I don't think you can actually force students to do anything like that. They have to find the fire in themselves. And I think whatever it might be, experience is compelling. What happened to you that you want to talk about, that needs a fire. And when you have that fire, then you can start talking about how are we shaping that, right? What are you going to do with that? What is, for me, a lot of things that happens with my work starts out with structure. It absolutely starts out with structure in my head. I might change that structure. But, I talk a lot to my students about where are you dropping your ideas, in what kind of order? How does that get you to what you want to do with this piece?
We're going to take a quick break. Thanks for listening to the Big Ideas podcast.
Question. Answer. Discussion.
If you are passionate about big ideas, consider sponsoring this program. To have your name or organization mentioned here, please contact us at ics@bgsu.edu.
Welcome back to the Big Ideas podcast. Today I'm speaking with Dustin Lance Black and Dr. Lesa Lockford about the intersections between performance, storytelling, and activism. Lance, in recent years, we've seen increasing attention to the need for authenticity in the portrayals of underrepresented identities, especially like within entertainment, like calls for trans actors to play trans roles or disabled actors to play disabled characters. What does authenticity in performance mean to you in practice? And kind of what purpose does it serve in ensuring equitable representation?
Well, I think that there's a lesson to be learned from the early 90s. In the early 90s, a guy named Jonathan Murray and his producing partner, Mary Alice Boonham, came to believe, and they were doing like reality television stuff. They just said, man, I don't think what's on TV now reflects what kids are experiencing in their communities and school. Why don't we build a show called The Real World? And in The Real World, we are going to include the people who kids would see in the real world. So not just heterosexual white people, right? So all of a sudden you had people from different backgrounds, racial diversity, usually as many women as men in the room, and queer people started to appear, probably because I give a lot of credit to Jonathan Murray, who was an openly gay man. This is in a time when that still wasn't easy. And they start to make The Real World with this idea that people want to see a reflection of what they exist in, and that if they're being fed something that is inauthentic, that does not look like the real world, they will eventually or very quickly, particularly young people, turn it off. And particularly then, when all of television was advertiser-driven, the eyes they wanted the most as advertisers were young people. So what do you got to do? I guess we have to start making television more authentically diverse and to represent these people and these things. Now, that was a beginning. We're still on that journey to continue to create content that is as diverse as the real world and starts to confront those issues. One of the wonderful things about the real world is it was people of diversity and minorities playing themselves. It's reality. One of the mistakes that then happened in Hollywood was they started trying to create diversity, but it was still a bunch of white straight dudes in the writers' rooms. And so a lot of it didn't feel right. And you could tell the difference between a gay portrayal written by a bunch of straight white dudes. Sorry, I love straight white dudes, but come on, they owned all the writers' rooms. What would eventually happen, and we'd ring true, is when like a Max Munchnick would create a Will and Grace. Oh no, that's gay. That's gay. If it rang true, and guess what? Because it was authentic and rang true, it transcended just the gay community. It was a huge hit of a show. It took a while. People were nervous to get there, but it got there. Now, I think we're not there yet. The real solution to me, particular television is a really good example, is as we continue to make our shows as diverse as the real world and the world we're experiencing right now, the way to make it authentic and ring true is to make sure those writers' rooms are as diverse as the program. There are programs in place right now through the Writers Guild. The Directors Guild has it as well. Diversity programs to bring more diverse folks into the room. And that's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's also the bottom line. And that's kind of good news. The shows tend to succeed more when the portrayals of people who have been under-depicted are being depicted by people who have that lived experience and they feel authentic. I'm not one who's gonna, and this might be controversial, mandate that you can only have a character portrayed by a person who has that exact same lived experience. I think there are sometimes situations where that's not possible, but they're rare. Or, I also think that queer people ought to be able to play straight people. So I don't want to go quite down that rabbit hole because it doesn't end well for gay people. I will say it doesn't seem wise to me to cast a cisgender person to play a trans person or a bunch of white people to write an African-American story. You want to get people into that room, that writer's room, or cast to perform it who have that lived experience. And why? We already just established that. It's going to feel more real. It's going to be more authentic. If you have a trans person playing a trans role, they are going to bring all of the granular details, the things that you might have missed when you were writing it, the things the director might not know. They're going to bring that to it. It is going to most likely be a much better performance. Same goes for gay people, bi people, trans people, lesbians playing those roles. We're at a place still in society where there's so many misconceptions about who we are and stereotypes of who we are and tropes that litter the writer's room. You better get people in there with lived experience to correct the record. And I think it will, it's the right thing to do, but it's also going to make that show have a better chance of being a hit. That's where I stand on that. I think that, where it's challenging because certainly in the more lonely experience of feature writing, if you want to have a diverse cast, well, it means that the writer is not going to have all of that lived experience. I still think we should be able to have ensembles that reflect the real world, meaning there's going to be diversity in these shows. The obligation ought to be that writer and that director go out and work with those communities and learn. Do your research. Share your scripts and say, is this right? Let me tell you, people are eager to help you make it right. But that work has to be done because it's the right thing to do, but also it's going to just make a better movie. So that's where I see it right now in terms of a strategy to have more authentic, diverse depictions. I would like to say that these ideas might change. We are in the middle of this. I might be wrong in some ways, and we will see.
Lesa, do you want to add anything about kind of how you approach that idea of authenticity and what that looks like in, some of the kinds of performances that you do, which might be you like a one-woman show where there are many different characters. How do you approach some of those questions?
Let me first start by sort of segueing with something that Lance just mentioned, and that is that, I'm fortunate to be an educator at this particular cultural moment because my students keep me honest, right? My students are the ones that are coming to me and they're saying, we we want, color conscious casting. We want representation. The thing is, well, yes, we might be able to say an actor needs to could portray these people that are not part of their identity. The question remains, should we? Right. So it is an ethical question at the end of the day. And so all my arguments about art start to fall by the wayside when I start to recognize where we are with this. And maybe one day we will live in a world where actors can, do more moving across various identity positions than they can at this particular moment. But this is a moment that we live in, and we really embrace that. We want to embrace that. I think the other part of that is I want to ask the question about purpose again. What is the purpose of this particular performance? So when I'm thinking about the shows that we do on our stages, I'm having an audience come in that, is there to be entertained or engaged in some particular way. I want them to see the right representations on that stage. There's something in my world that's called performance as a method, which is that this idea that the actual doing of performance helps you learn something about other people. So in ethnographic performance, I talked about it earlier, that my taking on the lives of these other people, their walk, their way of talking, and deep listening to how they put words together, that when I perform it, something happens to me. I learn something. Not exactly, but there is, empathy is not an absolute, right? But there is some movement towards some kind of understanding of that person. Now, when I've done this kind of work in a classroom and had someone portray an African-American person who is white, or, any number of things, of identity positions have been performed in my class by other people going and interviewing that person and so on. And the question always comes up, is that okay, right? And so how they're positioning themselves and doing it, are they making fun of this person? Or are they truly embodying them? I believe they do learn something out of it. Now, the question remains, in that particular situation, it is a pedagogical context. And so I'm asking myself, does that still pertain? Are they learning something from that? And it's not being put on the stage in a different way. We're engaging in a kind of critical exploration of it. We also have to say, in some cases, I'm thinking of Larissa Fasthorse at the moment, who Indigenous playwright who makes the claim that, sometimes I have to turn my scripts over to universities or wherever, and they're going to put white people in those roles. I understand that, because if they don't, they're not going to find the Indigenous people to play those characters. So what is the purpose we're doing when we stage whatever we stage? And I think we have to be cognizant of what we're doing, and I think we have to be able to recognize the fallibility of it and how we are, what is the moral contract we're forging with the other that we're performing.
I have a sort of change of gears and asking you both to kind of talk a bit about how the rise of social media has changed how we think about both entertainment and storytelling and audience. Do you have thoughts on how storytellers, performers, can maybe more effectively use some of those tools to further social causes, encourage social action, to sort of move from the kind of passive spectatorship to a kind of more direct engagement with the world? We often talk about kind of the perils of social media, but is there a flip side to it as well?
Oh, gosh. I'm not a huge fan of social media right now. I have been in the past. I just find it to be quite a distraction at the moment, and just filled with disinformation, and it feels more divisive than it is uniting, and it didn't start out that way. And even creatively, I have a bone to pick with social media. The other day, I had an executive who I won't name, but this executive ran down sort of a description of what audiences seem to be engaging in the first act of a television show. And I said, you just described TikTok. And that might be true, but that's TikTok. And what we're trying to do something else here.
It's a little longer than 7 seconds.
Well, yeah. And it's like, I don't know. Listen, I enjoyed TikTok for a little while, particularly in lockdown. You know what I mean? I death scrolled that. I learned all kinds of things that aren't true. But But you know, at a certain point, I want to get back to telling stories. And at a certain point, I really got sick of TikTok. It started giving me a headache. It's made me feel sick. It was just too much. So, you know, once that drug wears off, I hope sometimes we can get back to telling a really good story, a story that goes deep. You know, I in my field, social media has begun to influence the way we edit our shows and write our shows, and not always for the better. You know, I enjoy the ability for social media to promote. I do like that. And you know, it's nice that we can target people who we think are interested, but I'm also pissed off that it's very hard to get that new audience to things. You know, you often feel like you're preaching to the choir because it feels like social media means you've only brought in the choir, which is very frustrating to an activist. That's the opposite of what we're always trying to do. Don't preach to the choir. Figure out how to get yourself in front of people whose hearts and minds might be able to be changed and moved. And social media makes that difficult sometimes. And I'm sure there's someone much smarter than me who knows how to actually get outside of the siloed thinking using social media. I am not the guy to ask. I hope that person raises their hand and sends me a message on social media and teaches me that.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad to hear you kind of, you know, sound not a positive note about it too, because I think social media has a great capacity to, as you called it, silos. I was going to say balkanize people, and so once they're you know in the in group with each other, then it becomes really easy to sort of lob attacks from that position of kind of comfort with others, and that's what it feels like to me. That said, of course, and I'm going to say what everybody knows, and that is there is also that opportunity that social media has given folks to be able to speak about themselves to the world in some particular way that they may not have been able to do in any other kind of medium. And that is empowering for lots of folk. So I recognize it. I do think that it has a silencing effect on so many things, and it's been hurtful in so many ways. So I'd like to think there's a way that we can move past it or into some, you know, is there a way that we can have a kindness project that just takes over on social media and we stop finding ways to use it as gotchas, you know, things to get how do we build coalitions? How do we, you know, use story to speak with and find what bonds us instead of constantly saying, these are our differences and I'm going to stand in this position against you in that position, because that just doesn't do any good, ultimately.
Sort of building on that, like when you know, we went through a period where we, and there's laws are still in place, where we hold newspapers and news programs to account. When are we going to hold social media to account? You know, the truth used to matter. And there are some things that are true. There is such a thing as facts. And yes, we always want to keep putting pressure on them and examining them. But when will that matter enough again? When will some of these social media companies start to pay a very big price for disseminating things they know full well are lies?
And dangerous lies, quite
incredibly
often.
dangerous.
Yeah.
I just think that social media was so incredibly promising because it gave voice to people who didn't have the voices. It let people to come together. It actually sparked revolutions that looked like it was going to bring democracy to the world. And then the forces on the other side figured out, sadly, how to weaponize it. And they have. And so I'm just not a huge fan. Sorry.
Well,
but I posted on Instagram this morning, so I'm as addicted as anybody.
Well, part of what you're talking about is the difference between kind of the democratic potential of these tools and how the ways that the kind of monopoly capitalism of them they're ad machines. They're not actual communication tools. And so that until we sort of recognize either what they really are, and advertising agencies also there are certain codes of ethics of what can be advertised publicly, what kinds of small print has to be on certain things. We don't treat them like that, but we also don't treat them like newspapers, where there is, are standards to be held and lawsuits that can be lobbed if you deviate from that. It's still this sort of Wild West, this no man's land. And until that is sort of regulated in some way, we can see both the opportunities but also the dangers of those tools. I have a kind of final question for each of you, which is, what advice do you have for young people who want to see their lives and stories in all their complexity and all the nuance represented more fully on screen, on stage, in print? How do you recommend young people connect their interests with issues that matter to them?
You pick up a pen, get in front of your laptop, start writing. I want to hear it. The things I think that we like when someone really fully brings themselves to a film, TV, theater, a book, whatever it is, bring you to it. It doesn't mean it has to be autobiography, but I also love autobiography. And music, come on, it's like it moves you because you can hear them being moved. My advice is don't try to create the thing you saw and loved. Don't try to recreate that. Go do you. That project moved you because someone brought themselves to it so fully that they made it so intricate because they had that lived experience, that passion around it, that you responded. So now you go do the same. Correct the record. Destroy the misconceptions. Discard the stereotypes. Be you, fearlessly you, and get to work. I actually think almost everybody on the planet has at least one, if not many, incredibly compelling stories if you just mine deeply into them. It doesn't matter how small they are. If it's a very small story, just go slower and dig deeper, and it will fill a 2 hours on a movie screen. So I'm excited to hear you think they're out there. I want to see what they have to say.
Anything you would add, Lesa?
I think the currency of what happens to people and other people gravitate to that when they find meaning, there's this resonance that happens in that currency. And so, having folks tell their story, they when they do that, there's a lot of controversy in autoethnography and different fields that areas that I work in, as a kind of me search, that it's navel gazing, that it, something there. And so what I would just say is, do your story and recognize that in doing that, what you're really seeking to do is also bring other people in with you, right? That you're connecting to them through your story. And that's, there's a guy by the name of Greg Bordowitz who makes a distinction between confession and testimony. And a confession is something where, in some ways, you're seeking absolution from your audience, that you use therapy as some way of sort of going, I don't have to be shamed or guilty for this. Tell me I'm okay. Versus the testimony that comes forth and says, I'm going to speak to this because I was there and it's going to resonate with you. And so I think, that is a helpful dichotomy for me to be able to sort of, think about when I ask students to do it. It's not just tell your story. It's, again, yes, start there. Start with that story and find that connection to the world. But what she said is absolutely dead on. I just know in my own world with students, I want them to also recognize the burden of the resonance that has to happen beyond their story. And it always will, right?
Lesa, you're so incredibly perceptive and thoughtful, and it's intimidating, and I'm grateful for it. I wish we could have a tea or coffee every day. Yeah. I compared to how much it's really beautiful to listen to you talk, because I realize hearing you talk, I really am feeling my way through the dark. So I don't know, this has been, sorry to steal your podcast for a second, but what a pleasure to have met you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Lance and Lesa. This was such a pleasure. Listeners can keep up with ICS by following us on Twitter and Instagram at ICS BGSU and on our Facebook page. You can listen to Big Ideas wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Please subscribe and rate us on your preferred platform. For more information, you can visit bgsu.edu/BG Ideas. Our producers are Chris Cavera and Marco Mendoza. Sound engineering today was provided by Marcus Long, with sound editing by Deanna McKeegan and Marco Mendoza. Research assistance was provided by Branson Young, with editing by Carrie Hanlon.